11th of April, 1984. The first leg of the European Cup semi-final was taking place at Anfield. Liverpool vs Dinamo Bucharesti. There is a very physical midfield battle happening that's only heating up as the game goes on. All of a sudden, in one moment, we see Lika Movila defending his area. In the next moment, he's fallen over like a pile of bricks. What? Movila is being escorted off the field, holding his face together. We get a close-up shot and something looks wrong with his jaw. It's broken. Back in the 80s, there was only one broadcasting camera, so only those that were paying attention in the stadium knew what happened. Decades later, the man responsible reflected on what transpired in his autobiography. It was the best punch I delivered in my life. Graeme Souness has always been crazy. Before the boom and commercialization of the game, football was very different, and Graeme Souness was truly one of the best examples of the sort of player and personalities that this bred. Here's a sneak peek into how times have changed.
To Souness. Oh, that is a booking.
A booking? Today, this type of hit would come with a lifetime ban and aggravated assault charges. I want you guys to understand that Souness was in possession here. He had the ball. Putting that aside, Souness was more than just a hothead. A 31-year-old Souness transferred over to Serie A in 1984, and his 2 years there were enough for the great Diego Maradona, the best player on the planet at the time, to label him as one of the very best players he'd ever seen. There are so many stories involving Graeme Souness's incredible career as a player, and because he's so active, he has just as many, if not more, in his full-bodied managerial career. As a manager, he changed nothing about his hard-man approach, even when working abroad. This is him planting a Galatasaray flag in the middle of Fenerbahce's pitch after winning the Turkish Cup in 1996. If you know anything about the history of the Turkish league, you know that it's a wonder he's still alive to tell the tale. In another instance, in another country, he even unknowingly worked for an international criminal. Now, whether you think he was a good or a bad manager depends on the colors you represent and which team he was managing at the time, but one thing's for certain. There was never a dull moment with this guy. The current generation of football fans probably most associate Souness with his rants about his good friend
Paul Pogba. For 100 million, you're buying someone that has to make the difference in the big games. He's yet to do that. He's got technique. He's a bit of a YouTuber, isn't he? You know, you see him, he could juggle a ball.
Pogba's had 4 assists though.
No, we expect that from a £100 million man.
If he had been that good first time round at United, would Fergie have allowed him to go? His basic understanding of the position, he hasn't got.
It has come up on this programme time and time again, and it's not a case that you're picking him out and victimizing.
And I must admit that he did seem like he held a personal vendetta at times. But many of the feuds he's had with some other notable people make him and Pogba look like soulmates. Contrary to everything I've just said, the man did seem to have a much softer side. As both a manager and a player, there are dozens of accounts of him standing up to bigotry, racism, homophobia, and more during times where it wasn't exactly widespread, even socially acceptable to do so. Even more recently, after meeting a 14-year-old suffering from a rare skin condition, a 70-year-old Graeme Souness swam the English Channel to raise over £1 million for treatment and research funding. At the end of the day, it seems as time goes on, everyone seems to have forgotten that this man was once the man. So the question has to be asked, how good was Graeme Souness really? Hello, welcome back, hope you're well. Back by popular demand, here's a picture of a puppy. Subscribe if you want, but no stress. This video was originally supposed to be like 15 minutes max, but this man is just far too interesting to cut out a lot of detail. Graeme Souness had many nicknames in his career. Scotland's hardest man, Suey, yes, he is the original. Champagne Charlie, owing to his love for ladies and partying, the mustachioed assassin, and more, based on his aggressive nature. However, according to Souness, he's not entirely sure where the fire inside of him comes from. Both my parents were mild gentle people. I'm the youngest of 3 brothers. Neither of them is like me. I come from a working class family. We lived in a prefab. We had nothing, but we had everything. Born in 1953 in Edinburgh, Scotland, his early life was shaped by the working class environment in which he was raised. He had a strong sense of discipline and determination, characteristics that later defined his career in football, a passion developed early, playing the sport in the local streets and parks of Edinburgh, eventually settling into North Merchiston Boys Club. The Scouts came soon after. London, as a schoolboy with Tottenham Hotspur, was where he eventually landed at the age of just 15 in 1968. However, Souness found it difficult to make an immediate impact at Spurs due to limited first-team opportunities and competition for places, which made sense. This Spurs side was pretty serious. It was 1968, only 2 years after England won the World Cup. Jimmy Greaves and Martin Peters, both World Cup winners, were just some of the England internationals in the squad. Still, a 15-year-old Souness thought he was better. I don't know where it comes from. I just grew up having ridiculous belief in my own ability. I've never ever gone into a game believing these people were better than me. Souness, later in life. I believe it. To top it all off, he was trying to convince Bill Nicholson, Tottenham's best and most successful manager of all time, that he was a fool for not picking him over World Cup winners. He was rubbing people the wrong way. He even went on strike once, going back to Scotland during the off-season and simply refusing to come back. Spurs wouldn't allow him to transfer away, yet they still would not allow him to get the minutes he desired. Contractual situations back then were such that he had no real way to combat this. Luckily, this case didn't go beyond a place of no return, and the reason for that was that Souness was talented. Very talented. A midfielder with the determination and guile to go as far as he wanted, and Spurs wanted him to go with them. In the end, Souness ended up staying at Tottenham Hotspur until 1972. In the same year, he moved to Middlesbrough at 19. This is where the hairs on his chest began to sprout. Under manager Jack Charlton, legendary former defender, World Cup winner and elder brother of Sir Bobby Charlton, Souness received a lesson in the levels of maturity required to succeed in the game. It was at Middlesbrough that he developed a reputation as a tough, aggressive and highly combative midfielder. He was tough on the tackle, sure, but Souness also had a refined technical side to his game, vision, control, an unbelievable mustache. The man had it all. He played 176 games for Middlesbrough, scoring 24 goals all in all. Of course, his stats mean little due to his function, plus advanced stats were nowhere near the level of sophistication that they're at right now. What we can gather, without a doubt though, is that his impact was massive. He was a key player for Middlesbrough during their promotion-winning campaign in the 1973-74 season. He fit right into what Charlton saw as his vision for how football should be played, and after years with Borough, there was no doubt that he was on his way to bigger and better things. The way he describes the situation towards the end is that he only had one place in mind that he wanted to transfer to: Liverpool. Why? Was it because they were the best team in the land? Was it because they had just won the European Cup? Those factors helped, but no. It was because he didn't want to move houses from where his lovely landlady would take the best care of him. When he walked into a meeting between Middlesbrough's upper management and Bob Paisley in late 1977, he knew everything was coming together. The Liverpool team that Souness walked into was not normal. This was a team that had won 3 of the last 5 First Division titles and had just come off a season where they very nearly became the first English side to win a European treble, only losing the FA Cup final to Manchester United. Bob Paisley was in charge. With an aging Ian Callaghan, he needed to reinforce his midfield with fresh talent, and he had seen enough of what was out there to commit Liverpool to spending big. In came Graeme Souness at 24 years old for a record transfer fee between British clubs for a midfielder. £352,000. Coincidentally, he came in the same season as the player who broke the overall transfer record between British clubs. Liverpool had just lost Kevin Keegan, the best attacker on the planet, to Hamburg for a world record fee of £500,000. This is the same man that was about to win back-to-back Ballon d'Ors. How do you replace a talent like that? If you're Bob Paisley, the answer is simple. You take $450,000 of that fee and buy a man that would become the greatest Liverpool player of all time, Kenny Dalglish. Being Scottish, both Dalglish and Souness were familiar with one another and inevitably ended up getting along very well, rooming together on away days and more. Dalglish did once admit to thinking that the way Souness seemed to obsess over his hair and mustache with products was a little odd, but they got on regardless. Souness to this day refers to Dalglish as the best player he ever played with. This Liverpool team is widely regarded as the best Liverpool team ever, and quite possibly the best British team to ever exist. It's hard to argue given the trophy count. In 7 seasons spent at Liverpool, Souness won 5 First Division titles, 4 League Cups, and 3 European Cups. No British club has matched this kind of continental and domestic dominance. But it was about more than the results. This team was special in so many ways. The characters, the mustaches, the desire to win, a desire that far trumped anything material, and also something that was reinforced by the club's policies. In the Everything I Know About Me podcast, Souness claimed that the bonuses for winning the League Cup, and the European Cup were all roughly £5,000 for all players. The fact that the reward for each win and each title were equal showed how seriously each competition was taken. Dalglish and Souness were the top 2 earners in the entire country. The money was fabulous, but not anywhere like it is today. The money footballers earned back then was life-changing. Nowadays, it's generation-changing. All that aside, it was about dominance. There are so many notable performances that the history books will remember Souness by that it's impossible to list them all in a coherent video. We had the 1981 European Cup final against Real Madrid, a 1-0 win which he stamped his authority on all game. The 1982 League Cup final, he scores this absolute thunderbolt and helped guide Liverpool to victory. The 1984 European Cup final, he did more of the same, scored his penalty in the penalty shootout, and won his 3rd European Cup title. But for all of his positive attributes, the man had a very hot head and wasn't afraid to let his emotions explode. What sets him apart from most is that he was never afraid to deal with the repercussions. The off-camera punch on Lika Movila mentioned in the intro occurred in the semi-finals of the 84 European Cup first leg at Anfield. The retelling of it is quite the story when you combine the different accounts.
I don't quite know what it was, but there's a fella on the floor.
He just chinned this fella, bang, broke his jaw, and he was laid out flat on the ground.
Before most matches, former player Steve Nicol claimed that Captain Souness would famously say, "If they want to play, we'll play. If they want to fight, we aren't losing any fight." Kenny Dalglish recalled that in the match, everyone knew what was about to happen. Movila was warned. Graeme told him that if he pulled his shirt again, he'd get it. He got it. Souness himself backed these claims up. Movila was the worst of the worst. He kicked everything that moved and 3 times caught me with a punch off the ball. I'd had enough. By the time the referee stopped the play, the mustachioed assassin was 40 yards away, pointing to his wrist, claiming Movila was time wasting. He wasn't. In the second leg, the man was public enemy number 1. As soon as Liverpool arrived in Romania, the bus was being pelted. Opposition fans were in full force. Lucky for him, he wasn't the only mustachioed man in the squad, so he could point the finger and turn attention away. Facial recognition, it wasn't as advanced at the time. This didn't work on the pitch, where his shirt number was easy to spot though. He definitely should not have been on this pitch, let's be real, but he was one of the star performers in that semi-final as Liverpool went through. This fiery persona was not limited to opponents either. This is Tommy Smith and this is Phil Thompson, 2 Liverpool legends that Souness very infamously fell out with. First up was Tommy Smith. Smith, a local Liverpool man, was 8 years Souness's senior and had been at the club since 1960. When Souness joined, Smith was in his final year at Liverpool but was well known as one of the hardest men to touch a football pitch. He was known as the Anfield Iron. Souness did not care. He flew into tackles and training, never backed down from a fight, and imposed himself on his much senior players. This rubbed Smith the wrong way. And even though they only played with one another for a few months before Smith left the club, the sour taste would permeate for decades, as we'll find out. Next up is Thompson, another local Liverpool man and the club captain, a more personal feud. Similar to Smith's outlook, Souness's everything or nothing playstyle was seen as nothing but acting and tryharding to Thompson from the very beginning. Naturally, Souness was seen as a leader and future captain by many. Thompson felt he was deliberately trying to steal the captaincy from him. Words were thrown as Thompson claimed that Souness married his first wife, who admittedly came from a wealthy family, for her money. Odd, because as we've discussed, Souness himself wasn't doing too badly. This resulted in a brief physical altercation, but the details are murky over 40 years later. Of course, his lack of professionalism and dips in form is widely quoted as the reason behind Thompson losing his captaincy and Souness taking over in '82. Having said all of that, these feuds, and there were more than just the two, believe me, never seemed to affect Souness's on-field chemistry and playing ability with his teammates. This is further proof that you don't need to like your colleagues to get the job done. Remember that, everyone. It's an important point. Overall, Souness's 7 years at Anfield were very successful, aggressive, and legendary. But in 1984, after winning his third European Cup, he decided to move on. The wind blew in the direction of Sampdoria, and Souness went with it. This was a shock to many as he was only 31. Still, the Liverpool captain had just played a 61-game season with Liverpool, winning the First Division, the League Cup, and European Cup. But he's since been very candid about the reasons for leaving. Surprise, surprise, the first reason was money. The second reason was that all the best players were moving to Italy at the time. Zico, Maradona, Platini. He wanted to add his name to this list. Nothing about his playstyle changed despite being in a different country. However, what did change was the space that he was awarded. I went there and I found it easy. It was a bit slower. There wasn't so much pressing. There, for a midfield player, you could get on the ball a lot easier because they would retreat and back off to their own half and let you have the ball. In these conditions, he flourished, winning the 1985 Coppa Italia, the first time the club had done so. He only ended up staying in Italy for 2 seasons. His time there wasn't as trophy-laden as his Liverpool tenure, but is still thought of warmly. And a big reason for that is that many remember him as a pivotal figure in helping establish the winning Sampdoria sides of the late 80s and early 90s, mentoring the likes of Gianluca Vialli and Roberto Mancini, who led Sampdoria to league titles, cup winners' cup wins, and more after he left. The reason he left was because he got an offer he simply could not refuse in '86, a player-manager role with Rangers, back in his native Scotland, a fitting transition into the next chapter in his journey. Okay, so this transition, it wasn't too swift. This happened in his first game at Rangers. An immediate red card for a rake on George McCluskey against Hibernian. You'd think he'd calm down now, due to his new role. Nope. Apart from being stereotypically hot-headed, Souness did what he does best and revolutionized his new club. Now, as a manager, his word was gospel, and his word turned out to be the winning formula. Naturally, his playing time dwindled down until he ultimately officially retired from playing in 1990, but that was mostly symbolic as he only played 7 games from 1987 to the day he stopped. As it turned out, management seemed to be the perfect fit for Souness early on. At the end of the day, he received the best education he possibly could. He was managed by Bill Nicholson at Tottenham Hotspur, Jack Charlton at Middlesbrough, Bob Paisley and Joe Fagan at Liverpool, Sir Alex Ferguson with the Scottish national team, and Eugenio Bertolini at Sampdoria. He was ready. Rangers had not won the league title in 9 years when he arrived and had just finished in 5th. Glasgow rivals Celtic were the reigning champions. And yet, 4 years after joining Rangers, the club had won 3 league titles. And part of what made him so successful was his decision to think differently. English clubs were banned from competing in European competitions due to the devastating Heysel disaster. So he offered English players an opportunity that was unavailable back home: European football. Historically, the usual direction of player traffic was the other way around. Souness himself is a prime example of this. This was not normal. Another example of his, well, for lack of another word, unorthodox approach came with the signing of Maurice Johnston, although this one was to his own detriment. Okay, history time. Rangers was almost entirely a Protestant club of native Scottish origins, with Celtic being a club with Irish Catholic roots. Religious and geographical affiliations mattered a great deal, and as we know, they still do to this day. To some, the idea of a Catholic player playing for Rangers was deeply resented. Souness did not care. He was determined to sign the best players and abolish any sentiments that prevented him from doing so. So, as time went by, he proceeded to sign a whole host of players of all shapes, colors, sizes, and more. But no player made more headlines than the signing of Maurice Johnston.
I never thought they'd sign a Catholic, especially the one that did sign there. Just unbelievable.
It's for blue noses, it's not for Catholics. I don't agree with signing a Catholic up. Keep it a blue team and they're going a lot better.
Do you think it's a good thing that he's signed for Rangers?
Good thing for himself, maybe. But for Rangers, I don't think so. No.
He wasn't the first Catholic player to represent Rangers, and Souness himself was married to a Catholic woman and was raising his children as Catholic. Johnston, however, was an exceptional situation, as he was not only Roman Catholic, but was previously Celtic's leading man, winning their last title with him. In the end, the transfer was fruitful for Rangers. However, both Souness and Johnston's security had to be beefed up. For a period, he was escorted to and from home. He was also warned that there was a threat of a shooter coming for him on a few match days. He was a common feature as a top story in the Scottish press. This man literally had a target on his back. Well, both literally and figuratively, it seems. On top of that, he wasn't exactly throwing caution to the wind from a PR perspective. Match officials were regularly giving him touchline bans for saying the wrong things to them, so he would name himself as a sub and gain dressing room access. It's a big brain move. He lived in Edinburgh and commuted to Glasgow, so the Rangers fans never truly connected with him. Controversy and Graeme Souness are one in the same, so it should come as no surprise that his time in Glasgow was limited. The next stop was somewhere he was certain to get more love: Liverpool. On paper, a warm turn of events. Sadly, there was some unfortunate realities about this return. He took over from his former teammate, countryman, and friend Kenny Dalglish as the Liverpool manager, a man who left the role midway through the season due to the pressure of the job and a general sadness. The Hillsborough disaster was still very prominent in the minds of the local community, few more so than Dalglish. The man was attending dozens of funerals, sometimes up to 4 in a single day in the aftermath. He was tired, very tired, and drained. So he left. Liverpool's top players were all either fast approaching or over 30 and not fit to compete at the top level. The entire city was shell-shocked, making it an almost impossible battle for anyone brave enough to take the job. But, as we know, if nothing else, Souness is a brave man, perhaps to a fault. When he was a player manager, he could exert the usual authority that comes with being a player and leader of his teammates. Being exclusively a manager was a whole different story. Almost nothing went right. Phil Thompson, the man who lost his captaincy to Souness as a player, was now the Liverpool reserve coach. Their feud carried over, as Thompson was overheard bad-mouthing Souness behind his back to rival coaches, including Sir Alex Ferguson and Brian Kidd, showing weakness to rivals like United. That's not a good look. Souness fired Thompson. Tommy Smith, another one of his former nemeses, was no longer even employed at Liverpool in an official capacity, but was reportedly caught doing the same thing to active players and coaches. He was banned from all official club areas. In Tommy Smith, Souness claimed he had, quote, made an enemy for life. And then came the FA Cup debacle of '92. Souness sadly suffered from heart complications and required triple bypass surgery. Thankfully, it was successful. Now, he did an interview where he celebrated his successful surgery, along with Liverpool going through to the FA Cup final. Nothing wrong with the idea. The only problem was that, 1. He did it with The Sun, a newspaper that falsely blamed Liverpool fans for the Hillsborough disaster. 2. Graeme Souness himself had banned players from talking to The Sun as a result of it. And 3. The article came out on the 3rd anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster. There was absolutely no coming back from this. He names the decision to give this interview as the biggest regret of his life. Liverpool won the FA Cup that season after beating Sunderland in the final, the only trophy that Souness won as a manager of the club. But still, even directly after that victory, there was no love for Souness as manager anymore. Not by the club, not by the supporters. This was known before the final was even played. His doctors did not give him the okay to travel to Wembley for the final, but he felt he needed to make an appearance. If you look at any pictures of Souness from the day, you'll notice that he's accompanied by a man in all of them. This man was his doctor and was following him around to make sure that he didn't get too excited as to exacerbate his condition. Genuinely quite an impressive feat. It must have taken an incredible amount of willpower to do this. Now, he informed the club of his decision to attend. And yet, I had to get my own taxi from the hospital in Manchester to the airport, and my own flight to Heathrow, and my own car to the team hotel in Hertfordshire. They were distancing themselves from me. I should have left then. For some reason, he remained at Anfield for 18 more months. 18 miserable months. At the very least, he gave debuts to Steve McManaman, Jamie Redknapp, and Robbie Fowler. So it wasn't all bad. Where to next? A bit of a break, one he should have taken a long time before. Lots of golf was involved. Until Turkey came calling, Galatasaray, an unexpected one-year adventure that culminated in a 4th place finish, and Souness placing himself on the Turkish most wanted war criminals list. Busy boy. Galatasaray won the Turkish Super Cup against Fenerbahce at Fenerbahce's home stadium. It was a great achievement. How do you think Souness celebrated this win? By planting a Galatasaray flag in the center of Fenerbahce's pitch. This act produced this picture that is still talked about in Turkish football culture. It's a great picture, but it's also an act that can be seen as attempted suicide to many. He did this because the president of Fenerbahce made a pretty abrasive comment about Souness when he first joined his rivals, saying that Galatasaray had signed a cripple, referring to his heart surgery. His response?
9 months further on, we win the cup in their stadium, big flags handed over from the supporters. So I've now got this flag jogging back up to the halfway line to get the cup, look into the emptying stands, and I see this director in the director's box sort of looking down. I thought, I'll show you who's a cripple.
The image of Souness planting the flag was likened to that of Turkish hero Ulubatlı Hasan, who was killed as he planted the Ottoman flag at the end of the siege of Constantinople in 1453. What you're looking at here is Ulubatlı Souness. From here was stint after stint at various different clubs. At each point, there was some sort of talking point, and each stint was a failure in some sort of way. At Southampton, he lasted a year, and his highlight was signing Senegalese player Ali Dia. This was done after former Liberian striker and Ballon d'Or winner George Weah called up Souness and told him to sign this man, who happened to be his cousin. Souness based his entire signing on the Weah recommendation and never cross-checked anything. Well, as it turns out, Graeme Souness had never met George Weah before in his life, and George Weah had never met Ali Dia before in his life. It turned out that the call was a hoax, and whoever made it definitely was not George Weah. Furthermore, Dia definitely was not a good player. In fact, calling him a player was a bit of a stretch. He played one Premier League match as a sub for Matt Letizia and lasted about 50 minutes before being hooked out and released from the club 14 days into his contract. Exactly who was it that made the call posing as Weah? Was it a friend of Dia's? Dia himself? Dia claims it was his agent. Do we believe that? It's since come out that Harry Redknapp and Tony Pulis received similar calls, but both saw through the scam. I'd imagine they were just two of many. The worst part of all of this is that he trained with Southampton for over a week before making a Premier League debut. How is it possible he was not found out sooner? How is it possible that he was allowed on the pitch? So many questions. Next was Torino. After being told he had no influence on signings or club dealings, he left after only 4 months. Next was Benfica. Surprisingly, he lasted about 17 months there. In that time, he signed about 6 English players, many of whom he worked with previously. He refused to play a 19-year-old Deco that was touted as one of the best young talents in Europe because he rated English players over him. Benfica's chairman, João Vaile Azevedo, and Graeme Souness were on terrible terms by the time his stint was over. Vaile Azevedo lies when he looks in the eyes. Be careful, this man is dangerous, Souness said as he left the club. He sounded bitter. In 2001, 2 years after Souness left the club, Vaile Azevedo was arrested for embezzlement, fraud, falsification of documents, misappropriation of funds, and illegal player transfers where he pocketed transfer fees for himself. At this point, he's already served several years in jail on various charges. Currently, he's charged with attempting to defraud a major Portuguese bank into a €25 million loan. He's been living in London since 2018 and has managed to avoid extradition thus far. It sounds like Souness knew something the rest of the world didn't. Never a dull moment. Next up was Blackburn. A more stable environment. Souness managed to secure promotion for Rovers and sign on some great talent, eventually leading him to being offered the Newcastle job. Genuinely an incredible achievement because many had given up on the prospect of Souness being a good manager years before. Sadly for Souness, many of those people were vindicated because he was doomed from the start. His tactics were outdated. His understanding of players were outdated. His favoritism for certain players was not well hidden. And for some reason, chaos seemed to keep following him. A good example of that came in the first season of his Newcastle management career. Many will remember the extremely odd time when 2 Newcastle players started scrapping each other in the middle of a game. Unprovoked. Yes, you heard me right. Teammates. Lee Bowyer and Kieran Dyer. Both of them got red cards, of course, but even worse, Newcastle were already a man down. As per Dyer himself, the reason for the fight was
I didn't pass him the ball. He had this bee in his bonnet all game that I weren't passing him the ball. But as I was saying to him, I haven't given the ball away. I've given it to someone else. Yeah. But I haven't. If I give the ball away, then moan at me.
Back in the locker room at full time, Souness walked in. What do you think his response was? I'll let Alan Shearer explain.
You pair of I'll fight the both of you now. Come on. Come on, 2 of you. I'll have you and I'll have you together.
It wasn't too long after that he left Newcastle too, bringing a close to his career in football management. What I'm about to say regarding Souness's decision to leave management and settle into his role in media probably won't surprise you. In his book, Football, My Life and Passion, he was quite straightforward regarding what caused this decision. 2 words: Craig Bellamy. Coming from Wales, Bellamy was once the talk of the town when it came to British football. Young Player of the Year in 2002, an attacker with incredible technique. He had a good career, but if we're all being honest, he probably should have achieved more. So, what stopped him? Attitude. Souness knew all of this. On one occasion, Craig Bellamy was caught calling Souness a prick after being substituted. Souness called a squad meeting the following morning, and in said meeting, he grabs Bellamy by the throat and growls, "Let's sort this out like men." Forever the peacemaker, Alan Shearer has to pull Souness away, leaving Bellamy speechless. I got fed up dealing with the modern player. I don't have the personality. I don't have the patience. The modern day manager has to be someone who is zero confrontational and who lets everything go over their heads. You dare not fall out with any players today. Fall out with one, you fall out with half a dozen. And that means you're falling out with, what, £200 million worth of players? In the end, this was probably for the best. Having featured as a pundit on and off since the early 90s, as is now the norm, he took up that profession full-time after leaving the side of the pitch. And this is how I imagine most people watching this video know him. A massive injustice, but something that makes a lot of sense. His grumpy, hard man stance never faltered on camera, and Sky were quick to market him as such. His rants regarding Manchester United's most expensive signing of all time, Paul Pogba, have become legendary, frequently seen on Sky talking about how disappointing Pogba was on the pitch, pointing out his lack of effort and poor decision-making. He's since maintained that he was being critical purely because he viewed Pogba as a generational talent in the midfield that should have accomplished more. After all, Souness was once seen as a generational player himself. I think he would know. Plus, he was somewhat familiar with this sort of mentality. But you don't have to be a generational talent to know how high Pogba's ceiling was. Most of us agreed with Souness. Most of us also agreed that he seemed to use up more airtime than what was necessary to point out Pogba's mistakes at times. Bit of a fixation. When asked what he thought about Souness's views on his performances, Pogba commented that he never even knew who Souness was. And you know what? This is obviously positioned, from the media at least, to seem as though Pogba was really being mean and being negative towards Graeme Souness, but just on the off chance that he wasn't and that he genuinely didn't know who Souness was, it is plausible, you know? Souness is 40 years his senior and last played in England 9 years before Pogba was born, and most players don't even follow punditry or social media news about them just to maintain their sanity. It makes sense. Then again, it's also hard to believe this to be true. Pogba was a United Academy product. I'm pretty sure he would have come across the name a couple of times at least, them being United's biggest rivals historically. Whether he was being genuine or malicious, only Pogba knows. Still, Souness responded.
The oldest thing in football comes to mind. Put your medals on the table.
You can't really argue with that. Graeme Souness's career and achievements speak for themselves. Very few in football history boast a trophy cabinet as diverse, an overall career as well-traveled, a mind as open, a desire to win as strong, a right hook as devastating. Or left? I'm not entirely sure. It was thrown off camera. Graeme Souness, football's angriest man with a heart of gold.